As most of you know, I grew up Roman Catholic. And Mary played a pivotal role in my spiritual life and in what I would say my theological formation. Our Lady, as we called her, has many titles. I won't recite them all, it would take us all day, but First Disciple, Queen of Heaven, Queen of Peace, Mother of God, just to name a few. And we honored not only Mary, but we honored the many apparitions of Mary throughout the century. Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Medjugorje, which actually happened while I was a junior in high school. Most of our devotional life outside of the celebration of the sacraments, the Mass, communion, confession, etc., really focused on Mary, whether it be praying the rosary, doing novenas, or May processions, in which we all processed in as little children and crowned the statue of Mary with a bouquet of fresh flowers. She was a powerful force, an authority on the Christian life for us as children. And her titles and the devotions and the artwork all reinforce that. But there was also a counter narrative about Mary that was present most of the time, nearly all of the time. And I heard it in the sermons about Mary that I heard. There were a lot of them because there were a lot of Mary feast days. So the priests had a lot of chances to talk to us about Mary, and the sisters talked to us about Mary. And I also saw it in the statues and depictions of Mary, around which I was not have access to them in my disciple home because that was not something that was done. But when I went to church, to the Roman Catholic Church, I had depictions of Mary everywhere. And when I went to my grandmother's house, who was Roman Catholic, I had depictions of Mary. And Mary, especially in statues or in paintings, her head was always, or most always, tilted sideways or down or both, just like the one that's here on the communion table that comes from my office. This one is entitled Mary, Seat of Wisdom. But this downward posture always was interpreted for us as a communication of submission, even passivity, and oftentimes even connected with Mary, the suffering one. This is all to say that Mary was indeed revered as powerful, but she couldn't be too powerful. Her power and authority were always constrained, dare I say, conscripted into the teaching of the church. Now, I want to be clear about this. This was not just my experience. According to official Vatican statements, any message emerging from an apparition of Mary can be considered authentic and legitimate only if it reinforces the message of the gospel as the church interprets it. So if an apparition of Mary went outside those boundaries, it was considered not only unhelpful, but inauthentic and not legitimate. What I know now, but didn't know then as a child, was that the relationship between human power and divine power was a highly debated issue in theological circles. Dr. Russell, can I get an amen? And I also didn't know that this struggle with Mary's power goes all the way back to the Gospels themselves. The first chapter of the Gospel according to Luke is a good illustration of this dynamic. In the beginning of the Gospel, Luke says he wants to assure the most excellent Theophilus that he knows the truth, which some scholars propose is Luke's way of saying, don't worry, Theophilus, I'm going to tell you a version of the story that's acceptable, that's not disturbing to you, which kind of sets the stage for many things in the gospel, but particularly here about how Mary is going to be portrayed. I mean, Luke clearly portrays Mary as a strong and faithful Jewish woman. Mary had an encounter with the angel Gabriel, a messenger from God, and you know the story. She stood her ground. And in many ways, Luke was aligning her with the women prophets of the Hebrew Bible. But if you read it closely, Luke never calls her a prophet. That kind of power is reserved for others. Maybe the men. Maybe it's just for Jesus himself. We don't know. But that power is not for Mary. In addition, Mary in this text today calls herself a servant of God. Okay, let's be honest. I mean, that's the way it's typically translated. But the word in Greek is actually slave, which is the ultimate conscription of her power. And let's also be clear that enslavement, whether imposed or even self-imposed, should never be a paradigm for the spiritual life. And I don't think, in honesty, it actually aligns with the rest of this gospel, or certainly with the message of Jesus. But even with all the efforts to constrain Mary's power, Luke really can't suppress her agency, her deep authority, which we saw played out when Mary was engaging the angel Gabriel. Some scholars say she demonstrated outrageous authority. Isn't that lovely? Outrageous authority. The next time you see an image of Mary and you see her head downcast, say, I know she's a woman of outrageous authority, despite what that statue says. I mean, in the end, Mary gives consent to God's request for her to conceive, to carry, and give birth to the Holy Child of God. And when we move further into the chapter 1 of Luke, and the passage that we just heard, we hear Mary's prophetic outpouring, often labeled as the Magnificat, the name coming from the opening line, my soul magnifies the Lord. The Almighty has done great things for her, Mary says. And indeed, it is true. The Almighty has done so, giving Mary this opportunity to carry the Holy Child of God within her and to bring him into the world. It's hard to imagine a better honor. But the rest of her proclamation isn't about God doing great things for her personally. Did you notice that? All the great things she's talking about that God's done for her is about scattering the proud, bringing down the powerful, feeding the hungry, and remembering the promises God made to her ancestors of Israel. To me, somehow Mary is suggesting that the God who has done great things in the past is the same God who is at work in her. And so we can say, yes, Mary, the Almighty is doing great things for you. But the Almighty is also doing great things with you. The Almighty is doing great things with you. I'm not sure how much assurance or comfort Luke is actually giving Theophilus in his opening chapter. Mary's consent and her prophetic word literally embodies what can happen when human and divine power and wills are shared, mingled, and used together. The truth is, the world can be transformed. What things today could be scattered? What powerful forces could be made low? What might those who are hungry now, how might those who are hungry now be fed? How might nations plagued by terrorism and war be at peace? How might communities devastated by gun violence know safety? How might the oppressed be set free? Friends of God, I believe that you and I have given our consent to bear God's life. That's why we're here. And so I ask you, what great things has the Almighty done for you? What great things is the Almighty doing with you? And what else might you and God collaborate on this Advent season? These aren't questions to boost our egos. Let's be clear. Instead, if we can identify the great things God is doing for us and with us, we may be able to join in Mary's prophetic declarations. We might also remember just how important, how powerful we are, as well as our consent to cooperate with God is. In this season of Advent, may you tend your power, your will, your authority, and how together with God's power, God's will, and God's authority, we can transform the world.